Alrighty. So we started out by saying that there are three kinds of sermons. The first is where everyone's sleeping. You know the famous story about the Israeli bus driver? For sure you know this one, right? The Israeli bus driver. You know this one? You don't know the one? The Israeli bus driver who passes away and he goes to heaven. And no, I'm telling the story wrong. The rabbi who passes away and he goes to heaven, and he sees that the bus driver has a better place in heaven than he does. So he goes to complain. He says, "What's going on over here? How come the bus driver has a more honored place in heaven than I do?" So he says, so the reason is, he says, because when you gave your sermons, everyone went to sleep. When I drove my bus, everyone began to pray. So that's the famous story. So there's three kinds of sermons. One kind of sermon is where a person is, where the rabbi's sermon, everyone is sleeping. And another kind of sermon is a little bit better, but not much better. And that is where the rabbi is telling everyone that which they already know, but slightly better than they could have said it themselves. And this is, it's basically everyone preaching to everyone while remaining within their comfort zone, right? So how much better is that? I don't know. Then there is the highest kind of sermon. This is one that I don't want to wish on myself, but I have to recognize that I would have gotten somewhere in life if I would give a sermon or two like this. And that is where people storm out of my sermon because I said something that made them uncomfortable. They were that really threw them off. Now, is this good? I don't know. Is it good? Do we want to throw people off? We don't want to throw people off. On the other hand, do we want to always be telling people that which they already know? So what's the solution? Right? Like we want to be able to be pushed beyond our comfort zone. We want to be able to have new revelations in life. However, the problem is that our new revelations in life are often the kind of thing that makes us want to storm out. And this helps us to understand an interesting midrash on the beginning of our Parsha. We are beginning our study of Parsha's Vayeishev, and that is Genesis chapter 37, verse 1. It is Vayeishev Yaakov be'eretz migurei aviv be'eretz Canaan. And Yaakov dwelled in the land of his father's sojournings in the land of Canaan. And so this verse marks what might have been a change in Yaakov's life, where Yaakov is a change in Yaakov's life, where Yaakov is taking a new approach. Right? Until this point, Yaakov's life has been a constant struggle. Let's say in Yaakov's early life, we read that he was Ish Tam Yoshev Ohalim, a simple, straightforward person dwelling in tents, which we understand to mean that he's a scholar, an academic, someone who finds solace in study. But that's only his early life. The bulk of his life is spent in conflict with, first with Lavan, and then in sort of an uneasy tension with Esav. And those are the two main events described in the Torah up until now. And so Yaakov is wandering, and then of course he also has sort of some minor conflict, at least from one perspective, it's minor, with Shechem and the tribe of Shechem. So here, Vayeishev Yaakov settles down. Yaakov settles down, and the rabbis say, of course, the reality is that this verse about Yaakov settling down appears just before introducing the story of the strife between Yosef and his brothers. How they wanted to kill him, and instead they sold him to slavery. So this is kind of unfortunate. It brings to mind, you remember that scene from The Godfather? Every time I try to get out, they pull me back in, So here, Yaakov is trying to settle down, and he's drawn once again into a life of strife and conflict and struggle. And so the rabbis in the Midrash say, Bikesh Yaakov Leishev B'Shalva. Yaakov sought to dwell in tranquility. Kafatz Alehem Rugzo Shel Yosef. And at that moment, the tension of Yosef sprung up. So you have a comment? Any questions or comments so far? So the Midrash elsewhere puts it in slightly different terms, saying, is it not enough, Yaakov? Is it not enough for the righteous that they would experience the blessings of the world to come? Must they also enjoy tranquility in this life? That's one. So what is the implication of this midrash? That we shouldn't seek to enjoy this world? Is that a problem? to enjoy this world. And now if we look actually at Yaakov's life, we find that if we look at Parshas Vayechi, which we'll read in 2 weeks, Vayechi Yaakov b'Eretz Mitzrayim shva'asrei shana. Yaakov concluded his life in the land of Egypt, surrounded by his children. And the word Vayechi, and he lived, means even more than he settled down, that he actually thrived in the land of Egypt. So, is the Torah telling us Yaakov must not live in tranquility, and therefore he has to have the challenges? Or what is it?
Is it a rationalization for misery?
A rationalization for misery, perhaps. But it's interesting that you bring up that point, because actually, if we look at that midrashic teaching, so the first midrashic teaching that says Yaakov sought to dwell in tranquility, and the strife with his children, with Yosef, sprung up, would indicate that that there is some kind of problem with peace, and that we're trying to find, or I don't know. Maybe it's saying just this is the nature of. But the rationalization, the other midrashic teaching that rationalizes this, that says, well, you should be happy with the blessings of the world to come. That should be enough for you. You shouldn't also seek blessings of tranquility in this world. That doesn't speak to suffering. That just says that your primary measure of a good life should be by what is spiritually good, and not by tranquility in this life. That doesn't say that there's any value in suffering per se. Right? That doesn't make me feel better about suffering. Right?
And maybe the fact that it indicates a problem with peace is that it's not true peace. That we haven't reached it until
right.
Mashiach comes.
Oh, good. So what then is the true peace that Yaakov was suffering? So I saw an amazing teaching by the Rebbe that puts a different spin on this idea that Yaakov was seeking tranquility. And I found it so meaningful. Notice, Yaakov dwelled in tranquility. The pasuk says, Vayeishev Yaakov. Yaakov dwelt, he did settle down. Ve'eretz migurei aviv, in the land in which his fathers sojourned. And so here the Torah is contrasting the way of his father Yitzchak. Yitzchak lived there as a stranger, and Yaakov settled down there. It also, so that's one way of reading it. Another way of reading it is that it was because his father had lived there prior, Yaakov was able to settle there. So this means that Yaakov is finding tranquility. What was it that made it possible for Yaakov to dwell in tranquility? Two things. First of all, the tradition of his father, and second of all, Vayeishev, the continuation of the previous story in which Yaakov overcomes, learns to grapple with Esav, and then before that, Lavan. And so in the previous, as a matter of fact, Yaakov himself says, in Lavan Garti, I lived as a stranger with Lavan. And so what I'm seeing here is a life that seems the same, but the Torah is telling us is very different. Meaning, Yaakov is going through challenges again. He's going through struggle and strife again, but now he is tranquil, even in the strife and the struggle. When we seek, and maybe this is the critique of what the Midrash says, that seek not tranquility in this world, is not tranquility in heaven enough? Is that when a person says, I want to live in tranquility, I want to be able to settle down, what are they saying? So often, I'll hear from people, I want to have this certainly people in the younger years, I want to have financial security, right? Why do I want to have financial security? He doesn't say because because I can't handle stress. He doesn't say that. He says, I want to have financial security because, hi, Duncan. He says, I want to have financial security so that I can give tzedakah, I can give charity, and I can do mitzvahs behidur, I can do mitzvahs in the highest, the best way, right? Familiar with this approach? So, but why is that the thing that they want? And so, in a sense, we sometimes, when we seek spiritual fulfillment, what we're really seeking is our own fulfillment. And there's nothing wrong with that per se. This, going back to this sermon, right? This is hearing an inspiring teaching that is something that resonates with you. It's what you already know, but put a little better than you could have put it yourself. But because it's not really the teaching that's fulfilling, it's the self-reinforcement that feels good.
Rabbi.
So, yes, Edward.
I was thinking about a component of the difference between our perception between life in this world and life in the Olam Haba. When we talk about life in this world, we have a tremendous value to share with other people, which is called community. In community, we interact and we do the best that we can, joining with other people in all kinds of activities. And like you said, giving tzedakah is an ultimate purpose of sharing with other people. On the other hand, when we try to talk about the Olam Haba, and like you said, there's a big consolation for all the tourists that we have in this world, and it is that you're going to get your reborn in the Olam Haba. So I started thinking, is there an interaction with the community in the Olam Haba in the same way that we interact with people and make mistakes or make good deeds, do something positive, not so much to be remembered as a great guy, but because you feel that is your duty. What happens in the Olam Haba? Is there any notion of community? Nobody ever talks about community in the Olam Haba. We talk about the individual exclusively, that whatever this, whatever that, in the Olam Haba, that. So
right.
There's something that you cannot do without in this world. It is community, participation, sharing, or whatever. And in the Olam Haba, there's mute. There is no consideration, no talk, no agada, no perush, no nothing, because nobody knows a thing about the Olam Haba. But also, nobody talks or imagines community in the Olam Haba. So there's something that is lost in the Olam Haba, which is interaction, the ability to do better things that you did in this world. So there's lack of parallelism in there.
Hmm.
There's a something that is missing, that suddenly you turn into your own self, isolated from others in the Olam Haba, you and your neshama and your great harvesting from the deeds that you did in this world. But nobody talks about about community in the Olam Haba.
Fascinating. That's a fascinating comment about where is community in Olam Haba?
Yeah,
Is there community in Olam Haba? And I think it's a worthwhile question to explore. And let's hold the thought and let's see if it comes up, because I do want to remember this idea about community. I think it's a relevant aspect of this conversation. And also talking about shalom, right? The value that we place on harmony and peace. And that's something that I think we also have to come back to. So let me write it down so I don't forget to come back to it. Grab a, right, I have a paper here. Right here. And not only shalom, but Rav Shalom. Okay. So so talking about hearing that which we already, so that's, again, when a person seeks tranquility, what they're really looking for often is the reinforcement of themselves. Looking to be, it's essentially a selfish statement. And certainly that's hard to say that that's what Yaakov was seeking when he dwelled in the land of the sojournings of his father. Certainly one thing we know about Yaakov is that he had a tremendous work ethic. He worked for 22 years. And the Midrash says that he never slept, and he never slept a solid night throughout all of those years. So so Yaakov dwelling in tranquility. There's another approach to understanding tranquility, and that is understanding that everything is an opportunity to connect with God. And when a person has the sense that everything is a connection with God, everything is a creation of God, then they live in true tranquility. And in this sense, Yaakov Yaakov dwelled in tranquility in a land in which his father dwelled as a stranger. And this is after he himself dwelled as a stranger. So what we're seeing is that in the first part of Yaakov's life, we have three eras of Yaakov's life. We have the first era of Yaakov's life in which he dwells in the tents. And so he lives in the tranquility of a rarefied and idealized atmosphere. He lives in the laboratory. He lives in his perfectly curated world of his study. Then we find him going into the world of Lavan. And there he lives in tension with the world around him, because there is his spiritual worldview and there is the circumstantial realities that exist in opposition to his spiritual worldview. And now we have the synthesis of him dwelling in the same land where his father dwelled. Even his father lived as a stranger, but having tranquility in that land. And even now, the arrival of the strife with Yosef is not taking the tranquility away from him. It is facilitating the further integration of that tranquility. You see, the difference between the first, let's say, part 2 of Yaakov's life, in which he lives in conflict with Lavan, and part 3 of Yaakov's life, in which he lives in tranquility and then experiences the strife of Yosef, is that in the conflict with Lavan and even with Esav, Yaakov is taking the bull by the horns. And he's never sleeping at night. He's working nonstop to manage this conflict. The conflict is one which he has put himself into, and it's one that he struggles with constantly. Whereas this new level of conflict is because of circumstances beyond his control. And that's very different. Now, instead of having come to the house of Lavan and pushed himself outside of his comfort zone, he's come home and stuff starts happening to him. His son gets taken away. And then they end up looking for the food and finding themselves in Egypt. And ultimately, the children of Israel become enslaved in Egypt, meaning we have our freedom taken away. We have our own choices taken away from us. We are victims to circumstance in the most complete way possible, slavery. And here, despite all of this, in introducing both of those episodes, Vayeishev Yaakov, before the strife of Yosef, we are told Yaakov dwells in tranquility. And before the events leading up to the slavery of the children of Israel, we're told Vayechi Yaakov. Yaakov truly thrived. Because in the first example, let's again contrast the two worlds. When we define spiritual accomplishment by fulfillment, by how fulfilled I am, then we live in conflict. How spiritual does this feel to me? How inspired am I right now? Right? If that's my measure of accomplishment, then there is always going to be a sense of conflict between my ideal and my circumstances. And that's great. I mean, there's nothing wrong with a person seeking fulfillment. I mean, that's what better place should a person seek fulfillment than in spiritual idealism? That's Olam Haba, at least as we think of it. Right? And to this, the rabbis say, Lo dayecha, that's not enough for you. That's pretty good that a person would seek spiritual fulfillment in the spiritual ideal and realizing the spiritual ideal. But then there's a higher level. And the higher level is recognizing that no matter what happens to me, it is the hand of Hashem. It's the hand of God. And rather than saying, why is this happening to me? Saying, what is Hashem showing me right now? In that worldview, no matter what happens to me, I am in tranquility. And not only that, but it is precisely Meaning it's in the first worldview, I have to chase fulfillment because I'm looking for fulfillment and I have to make it happen. My primary tool of accomplishment is how effective I am. But in the second worldview, in this higher level, it's not really about anything that I'm doing because I'm embracing what Hashem is giving me. And what I need to be is open. There's nothing for me to do. I just need to be open. And that's dwelling in tranquility. And so Yaakov comes to this, of course. I think that the Torah is showing us that there's a path. The first step in a path is that a person does need to pursue fulfillment, but realize that that's not what it's really all about. That's not the end game. The end game is Vayeishev Yaakov be'eretz mugurei aviv, that Yaakov would dwell, that we would dwell in tranquility, that we would be able to accept, be open to the divine presence in our life, and recognize that there is a sense, a deeper divine revelation in that which feels uncomfortable to me. And that brings me back to my comment about the sermon where someone storms off, right? If this is something that's making me feel like I want to storm off, that's a sign to me that this is mamish, something so high, so beyond my experience. So the goal is that we wouldn't storm off in that moment, but that we would hold space, hold still, and be open to receive what is being given to me in this moment. So that's Vayeishev Yaakov be'eretz migurei aviv, Vayechi Yaakov be'eretz Mitzrayim. And indeed, the journey, the episode of the children of Israel living in Egypt is really what makes possible the receiving of the Torah. And this, I think, also the story starts with Torah, with Yaakov dwelling in tents, and it ends with Torah in the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. The preparation for this, for Yaakov dwelling in tents, to the Torah being given at Mount Sinai and ultimately bringing Torah into the land of Israel, is learning to stop seeking fulfillment and to be open to divine revelation, and particularly to divine revelation that's present in that which is awkward and uncomfortable. And recognizing that the highest divine revelation is in the awkward and is in the uncomfortable, because there's less me and there's more God. And this brings me to, Eddie, to your comments earlier about community.
Right.
The Mishnah says, Talmidei Chachamim Marbim Shalom Ba'olam.
Nachon.
Torah
Veyeda.
scholars, right? Torah scholars
Yes.
increase peace in the world. Shenemar.
And that is the purpose of Torah study, is to learn how to make shalom,
Right.
to be able to make shalom.
So what do we mean when we say that the Torah scholars increase peace? So what does peace mean there? So note that the pasuk says, "V'rav shlom banayich." There is great peace. Great is the peace of my children or my builders. Great peace. So a very high level of peace. Peace. Now note the irony of this statement, Talmidei Chachamim Marbim Shalom Ba'olam, that Torah scholars increase the peace in the world. If you read the book, the rest of the book in which this text is found, you'll see that every page involves Torah scholars arguing. So it's a kind of Orwellian statement, it seems, to say that in the book of the Talmud and the book of the Mishnah, where you don't turn 2 pages without finding an argument, that the book ends by saying, oh, but the Torah scholars are increasing peace in the world, right? What are we saying? So it ends off by saying, V'rav Shalom. We're talking about a great level of peace. This is not the kind of peace in which everyone feels good. That's not true peace. That's an unattainable and unrealistic and naive ideal. That peace would mean that everyone feels good. Rather, we're talking about a very special kind of peace that comes from being authentic in your argument and embracing, and even higher than being authentic in your argument, is the truth that comes out of debate. Why do we say that there's truth in debate? When I study Torah, and I think I understand what it is, I think I have the truth, I am at risk of making religion the God of my understanding. Whereas, when I have to sit across a table from someone who vehemently disagrees with me and is equally entitled to the truth as I am, and I embrace that tension, what I'm saying is that the Torah is larger than both of us. I'm acknowledging a truth that neither of us can hold on to and both of us access, and the more uncomfortable, the more discomfort there is in this tension, the more all-inclusive my truth is. And so in this experience of truth, I am closest to truth when I have many, when I share that truth with the experience of others.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
Through this debate, you both might, the person that you were disagreeing with, you both might see the same truth, but you see the ultimate truth the same, but your way to get to it is different. And one person might have more power than the other person, or more influence than the other person, or abusing the other person. You both see the same truth. You're both Jews, and you both see the same truth, but you're still in conflict with each other because
Circumstantial realities.
Because the truth exists. Just
Mhm.
because the truth exists, it's just sort of like a politician. 2 politicians might see the same, they want to get to the same result, but the way that they get to it is completely different. And the manner in which but they want the same thing.
Okay, so I'll follow up with that a little bit.
And I'll tell you, I want to say something that doesn't sound very nice. I don't want to be anybody's bitch, you know, and I don't want to be a monk either.
Right.
You know.
So I'll put it in. Let me put it in
slightly. The same truth, but do you follow what I'm saying?
Yes, I understand. I'll just follow up on that a little bit. What's interesting is that in the Talmud, the book in which this teaching occurs, that says that Torah scholars increase the peace in the world, there's an interesting feature about the arguments in the Talmud, which is that very rarely, you know, for the amount of arguments that are in the Talmud, very rarely does it say who is right and who is wrong. Very rarely. And that's very frustrating for people who study Talmud.
But this goes to Jews.
Yeah.
This goes to
yes.
Jews.
So we're talking about it in a Jewish context right now because we're studying Torah, and then we'll later try and apply that to our lives. But in the Talmudic context, it doesn't tell us who is right and who's wrong. What we're doing is we're living in this moment in the reality, which is that I cannot have the whole truth. I cannot know the whole truth because it's bigger than me. And that's, again, what I'm talking about here when we talk about the truth that makes me uncomfortable, right? A teaching that's new to me and that makes me want to storm out is because I'm feeling I'm being exposed to something that's greater than myself. And in a similar sense, being in that tension with a different perspective is but at the same time we're talking about the same thing, but we're coming at it from different angles, and feeling that tension means that I'm present with that which is larger than myself. And the goal is to be, and really the methodology of Torah study facilitates us being tranquil with machlokas, being tranquil with differences of opinion. The fact that the Talmud can have it seems like it's an argument on every page, but more than that, there's a cliffhanger on every page because every argument is unresolved. Most arguments are unresolved. This one says this and that one says that. And we try to understand both sides, but it's left unresolved, which is to say that, so who's right? What's the ending? That's not the point. The point is, when a person loves Torah, the point is that it's not about figuring out what the answer is. It's about appreciating the privilege of being able to swim in the ocean of the Talmud, having the privilege to understand the sweetness and the beauty of basking in the light of the Torah. And it's not about getting somewhere, it's about being there. And this again brings me back to the idea of Yaakov and his circumstances, the difference between Yaakov when he's struggling against Lavan, in which he's trying to resolve the conflict between his spiritual ideal and these kind of bad actors in his life, versus this new stage in his life, in which he's a victim to circumstance. But rather than seeing himself as a victim to circumstance, he sees himself as dwelling in a world ordained by God. I'll say that again. Rather than seeing himself as a victim of circumstance, he sees himself as lucky to be living in a world and a circumstance ordained by God. And this is the most tranquil a person can be. Verav shalom banayich. The great peace that arises from being comfortable in conflict. That's greater than just our ordinary peace, in which peace means that everyone has to get along with me. True peace is where I understand that I am privileged to be present with someone who is different than me.
Rabbi, concerning this, Talmidei Chachamim, Marbim Shalom Ba'olam, I always understood that, and first of all, it's defined as Talmidei Chachamim, not everyone that sits down for an hour or two and then learns Torah.
Well, I would stop you there and I would say,
highest...
Eddie, I would stop you there and I would say Talmidei Chachamim literally means those who study wisdom. It doesn't say Chachamim, those who are wise. It says those who are studying. So
yes, those that they
technically, the term means anyone who sits down to study.
I think that it is the highest level of study. Those that
lifelong students.
Yeah. So why did I always understand that dimension? Because they have sat down in the supermarket of Torah and gone through every Masechta and being illustrated and edified in study, knowing so many aspects of resolution of questions and conflict. Like you said, there's no solution, but they have learned the system, the dialectic system of how to use that knowledge, and that enables them to get into the world and assist others with the knowledge that they have, and be flexible enough to apply their knowledge to all kinds of things that occur in this world and create shalom, because that comes naturally to the Talmidei Chachamim, that they need to employ this knowledge in order to better the world, because that's what they have learned in the supermarket of Torah all their lives.
Okay, I think that's beautiful. I wonder if you're trying to say that this is more attainable, if this is something we should try to aspire to, or if this is something that's beyond our reach.
No, it
Um,
is it is defined as, I mean, we can aspire to a lot of things, and we are in a different kind of circumstance. We have to earn a living, and we don't have time in the 8 hours that we produce parnasa to dedicate the time the same way that the Talmid Chacham dedicates his time.
so
We
you're saying,
can,
so I hear you saying that we should, by association with Talmidei Chachamim,
right?
we
Yes.
can appreciate the we can appreciate that idea of of the holy conflict. So so yeah, I think that's a beautiful idea. And what I would encourage, and the reason why this is meaningful to me, is because look, life is, as I know it, involves conflict, and I've
Mhm.
both conflict with others as well as circumstances beyond my control. And one of the uh, one of the, I think, very meaningful aspects of this teaching is that it tells me to remember that the greatest gifts come in the world that's beyond my control. That is the definition of a gift, is that it comes out of my control. And so this is to be open to receiving these gifts, be trusting to receiving these gifts, is the shalva of Yaakov that leads to the Yechi Yaakov. The shalva of Yaakov, maybe that even helps interpret why Vayima'en lehisnachem, that Yaakov wouldn't be comforted on the loss of Yosef. Uh, don't try and make this better. It is. It's not fine, but it is ordained by God. It's uncomfortable, maybe, but that doesn't mean that I need to explain it away. I can be in it. I can be in this painful and awkward and uncomfortable place and not need to be comforted, not need to be told that everything's going to be okay, as though the situation as it is not ordained by God, is not good enough. So, of course, again, we start off by saying that it's not normal to think this way. The Midrash is telling us it's not normal to think this way, but it's very beautiful to see this way of thinking. Um, and similarly, just again to go back to the idea of Torah study, Torah actually takes conflict, and not only the conflict between the sages, but even discussing matters um, of deep uh, criminal matters, uncomfortable matters, unsavory things are described in the Torah. That's the work of the Torah, is to work through these things and to try and fit them in to, to understand what God wants from me in
Can I
these
say
things.
something?
So let me just conclude. I think that with in marriage, let's just say in relationships, talking about community, there's two aspects to every relationship. One is, what do you give in the relationship, and what do you receive in the relationship? How does your partner fulfill you, and how do you fulfill your partner? And that's a very important aspect of relationships. That's how we define our fulfillment in relationships. But an even higher level in relationships is training ourselves to be open to embrace the otherness of the other. And if we can be open to the otherness of the other, that's the real work. That's the real shalom. That's what really makes real tranquility. So, Jane, what did you want to say?
I want to say that the Torah scholars in the Talmud were